Welcome back to the Grave of the Shadows. Before we begin, a huge thanks for your support. If you love the mystery, make sure to subscribe and hit that bell. Now, dim the lights, and let's dive into tonight's chilling tale. In the winter of 1856, a mystery unfolded in a remote corner of Ohio that would defy all understanding. 3 children were born under such strange and inexplicable circumstances that even today, scientists and historians are still left baffled. These weren't just any children. They were triplets, born in the hidden basement of a Quaker meeting house during one of the most dangerous nights in the history of the Underground Railroad. On that bitterly cold February night, as the wind howled through the narrow streets of Cedar Mills, no one could have predicted the bizarre sequence of events that would follow. Ruth, a pregnant woman fleeing slavery, arrived at the meeting house seeking refuge. She was desperate, alone, and with child. Little did the members of the Quaker community know, the birth of her triplets would be the beginning of a chilling tale that blurred the line between history and the inexplicable. The triplets' birth wasn't marked by cries of newborns, but by an eerie silence. And from the moment they took their first breaths, strange occurrences followed. From uncanny emotional sensitivities to an ability to detect deception with an accuracy no one could explain. These boys were unlike any children the world had ever known. Their powers would become not just a curiosity, but a tool, one that could change the course of history. But what happened to them, and what they could do, was far more than a curiosity. It was something that could force us to reconsider everything we thought we knew about human perception. Their story, hidden for over a century, is one that has never been told, until now. In a small, quiet corner of Ohio, nestled between the shadowy hills and narrow dirt roads, a seemingly ordinary town harbored a secret that would forever alter the course of history. Cedar Mills, with its humble population of just 300 souls, was a place untouched by the chaos of the outside world. The town consisted mostly of simple homes, a general store, and a single Quaker meeting house, the heart of the local community. But beneath its peaceful exterior, Cedar Mills hid an underground network of resistance, one that would become known as Station 14 of the Underground Railroad. The Society of Friends, or Quakers, were a people driven by a profound commitment to equality, and it was this radical belief that made them instrumental in helping enslaved people escape to freedom. The meeting house, under the leadership of Elder Samuel Whitmore, had become a sanctuary for those escaping the horrors of slavery. But even in a town as small and tight-knit as Cedar Mills, the whispers of trouble were always near. The Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 had emboldened bounty hunters and slave catchers, turning Ohio into a battleground between freedom and oppression. It was on one of these bitterly cold nights, in February of 1856, that a young woman named Ruth arrived at the meeting house, unaware that she would become the catalyst for an event that would challenge the very fabric of reality. Desperate and exhausted, Ruth had fled her plantation in Kentucky, seeking refuge in the town. She was heavily pregnant, and it was clear to everyone who met her that she wouldn't be able to continue traveling north until she gave birth. Little did they know that Ruth's arrival would not only change the lives of those in Cedar Mills, but would ignite a mystery that would stretch far beyond the town. The triplets she was about to give birth to were destined to possess abilities that defied explanation, abilities that no one in the community, or even the world, would be able to comprehend. In the dim light of the basement that had housed so many freedom seekers before her, Ruth's life, and the lives of 3 extraordinary children, would take an unimaginable turn. Cedar Mills, Ohio, was a town that could easily be overlooked on any map, nestled far from the bustling cities and major highways of the time. Its small population, rarely reaching over 300 souls, made it the epitome of rural tranquility, where life moved at a slower pace. The landscape was dominated by rolling hills, dense woods, and the sound of rushing streams, all offering a sense of isolation that felt timeless. But within this seemingly quiet and peaceful town, there was a pulse of resistance, a heartbeat that thrived in the shadows. The Quakers of Cedar Mills were not just passive witnesses to the world around them. They were active participants in the fight for justice. Their beliefs in equality and freedom ran so deep that they became integral members of the Underground Railroad, a secret network of abolitionists dedicated to helping enslaved people escape to freedom. The town's meeting house, a simple brick building at the center of Cedar Mills, stood as a quiet testament to these values. It was more than just a place of worship. It was a sanctuary, a place where the cries for freedom were heard and acted upon. For nearly 8 years, Elder Samuel Whitmore had led the local Quakers with an unwavering commitment to the cause. His weathered hands, calloused from years of working the land, and his steely gray eyes, sharp from years of protecting the secrets of the Underground Railroad, had guided countless men, women, and children to freedom. Hidden beneath the meeting house, where no one would suspect, was a basement that served as a temporary refuge for freedom seekers. The entrance was cleverly concealed by a trapdoor beneath the platform used for the Quakers' religious ceremonies. Through this basement, freedom would flow, its secrets safe within the walls of Cedar Mills. But it wasn't just the slaves who found sanctuary in the basement. Many who helped the freedom seekers, those who risked everything for the cause, also found solace there. The hidden passageways and tunnels, carved into the earth over months of careful work, offered escape when danger was near. The ventilation system, ingeniously designed with hollow fence posts, ensured that fresh air reached those sheltering in the basement for days at a time. Despite its small size, Cedar Mills was at the center of a larger war, a war that raged just below the surface. The Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 had created an atmosphere of fear and suspicion. Slave catchers, now with the full backing of the law, were free to roam the state, hunting down those who dared to seek freedom. Bounty hunters, like the notorious Garrett brothers, had become a chilling presence in the area, knowing that the law was on their side and that those who helped the fugitives were considered criminals. The growing tension in Cedar Mills, heightened by these dangerous times, was palpable. Each knock at the door, each sudden visit, and each unexpected sound could spell disaster for those who were helping the freedom seekers. It was against this backdrop of secrecy, fear, and constant vigilance that Ruth arrived in Cedar Mills, just days before the birth of the triplets. As the storm clouds of danger gathered, she sought refuge in the one place that had become a beacon of hope for so many, the meeting house. The Quakers, always kind and welcoming, took her in without question, despite her obvious distress. They didn't know then that her presence in Cedar Mills would soon mark the beginning of a mystery far beyond their understanding. Ruth's story, though extraordinary in its own right, was only the beginning. What she carried with her, the triplets about to be born, would change the course of history in ways no one could have predicted. The night Ruth gave birth in the basement of the meeting house was unlike any other. The air was thick with tension, as if the very earth itself sensed the significance of what was about to happen. Ruth, exhausted from the journey, had barely been able to sleep for days. Her labor, though imminent, seemed to stretch the boundaries of time. She lay on the rough straw mattress, her breathing shallow, her face pale, as if the birth itself was somehow waiting for the right moment to change everything. Samuel Whitmore, the elder of the Quaker community, had seen many things in his lifetime, but nothing like this. As Ruth's labor intensified, he stood at the top of the stairs leading to the basement, his mind racing. His thoughts were divided between the safety of the others sheltering in the house and the urgent need to help Ruth through her childbirth. The tension outside, the distant sounds of patrolling slave catchers, and the growing storm of fear that seemed to pervade the very air were enough to make anyone nervous. But Samuel had always remained calm under pressure, his years of quiet strength and leadership serving him well. Down below, Ruth was far from the typical image of a woman in labor. There were no screams, no frantic movements, no desperate calls for help. Instead, she lay perfectly still, her eyes closed, as though waiting for something beyond the natural course of childbirth. The room was dimly lit by a flickering candle, casting long shadows on the rough-hewn walls. The silence in the basement was uncanny, broken only by Ruth's steady breathing. The midwives, Martha Whitmore and her daughter, Rebecca, exchanged uncertain glances. It wasn't just Ruth's calm demeanor that unsettled them. It was the sensation that something wasn't quite right, that the very air around them felt charged with an energy they couldn't name. The first sign of something extraordinary came when Ruth spoke. Her voice, though soft and weak, carried an almost eerie certainty. 3, she said simply, her eyes opening for the first time in hours. 3 boys. She smiled faintly, as if she had been waiting for this moment, waiting for the right moment to share the knowledge that her children were not like other children. The announcement caught Martha and Rebecca off guard. Triplets were rare enough, but Ruth's certainty was unsettling. There was something in the way she spoke, something that hinted at a deeper understanding of her children's destiny. Ruth's eyes locked with Martha's, and for a moment, Martha felt as if the room had become colder, the world outside more distant. There was something profound in Ruth's gaze, something that made her feel that what was about to happen would be no ordinary birth. As the minutes passed, the contractions began. They came, not with the expected intensity, but with a controlled, almost methodical rhythm. Ruth's body seemed to move in sync with some unseen force, as though guided by an instinct that went beyond human understanding. There were no agonizing cries, no sharp intakes of breath, only a calm that both comforted and unnerved those present. The birth of the first baby, a boy, came without a sound. No wailing or crying. The moment the child was placed in Martha's arms, she was taken aback. The infant's eyes were wide open, already alert, his breathing steady and clear. Before anyone could speak, the second child arrived, just as silently as the first. Again, the baby's eyes opened immediately, as though he had been born fully aware. The third followed quickly, without any sign of distress, completing the strange, silent trio. The triplets, perfectly formed, lay in their mother's arms as if they had been waiting for this very moment to arrive. Their stillness in the face of their unusual birth seemed to echo the stillness that enveloped the meeting house. As the minutes ticked by, there was an unsettling quiet in the basement. The triplets lay perfectly still in their mother's arms, their identical eyes following every movement above them. No one spoke. No one moved. It was as though the birth of these three boys had not only changed the course of Ruth's life, but of the entire world. When Ruth finally spoke again, it was not in words of joy or relief, but in quiet prophecy. They will know things no one else can. They will see beyond what others see. In the dim light of that cold basement, with the storm of fear and uncertainty swirling outside, Ruth's words lingered in the air like a shadow. The triplets, though just moments old, had already begun to show the world that they were not like any children the world had ever known. From the moment the triplets were born, it was clear they were not like other children. Their arrival, marked by eerie silence and an uncanny calm, was only the beginning of a mystery that would unfold over the following years. As they grew, their abilities became more apparent, abilities that defied every known law of human psychology and physiology. At first, the signs were subtle, almost dismissible. But as the triplets entered their second year, the signs became undeniable. The first oddity was their uncanny ability to sense things that others could not. At just 6 months old, Caleb, Ezra, and Isaac would often turn their heads simultaneously, as if drawn by something invisible to the rest of the world. They would stare intently at empty doorways or windows, their dark eyes focused on spaces where no one else could see anything. At times, the triplets would remain perfectly still for minutes, as if they were listening to something no one else could hear. The adults in the house were perplexed, attributing it to simple baby behavior, but it was the intensity with which the triplets stared, the way their eyes never wavered, that made everyone uncomfortable. As time passed, it became clear that these were not just random moments of infant curiosity. By their first birthday, the triplets began displaying an extraordinary sensitivity to emotions. Martha Whitmore, who took on a primary role in caring for the children, noted the first true signs of their abilities during a visit from a local merchant. The man, who had come to drop off supplies, greeted the triplets with a friendly smile. But the moment he entered the room, Caleb, Ezra, and Isaac stiffened. They turned their heads in unison and began to cry, not out of discomfort, but out of agitation. The man, who had been outwardly polite, seemed to take notice of the boys' behavior. Martha, too, was struck by how suddenly the children seemed distressed. It wasn't until the next day that the full scope of their abilities became clear. The merchant had left without incident, but the next morning, he was arrested for the murder of his business partner. The triplets, in their infantile innocence, had somehow sensed the man's hidden intentions, the darkness beneath his friendly exterior. These early incidents left the Quaker community in a state of unease. The triplets' abilities grew more pronounced as the months passed. By the time they were 2 years old, The boys seemed to possess a remarkable ability to detect deception with a precision that baffled everyone around them. If someone told a lie, no matter how small or insignificant, Caleb, Ezra, and Isaac would respond in a peculiar way. They would turn away, their expressions shifting from curiosity to disinterest, as if they had already judged the truth of the situation. But their ability went beyond mere lie detection. It was as though they could sense the deeper emotions behind a person's words, the hidden truths that others sought to conceal. Martha first realized this while speaking to a local farmer who had come to trade goods. He was known to be a kind man, but when he spoke to the triplets, the boys turned away. They refused to engage with him, their eyes narrowing, and a sense of discomfort filling the room. The farmer, puzzled by their sudden rejection, asked Martha if something was wrong. Martha, somewhat perplexed herself, explained that the boys often did this when someone wasn't being entirely truthful. Later that evening, the farmer was found to have been hiding a portion of his harvest, evading taxes by misreporting his produce. This marked a turning point. The triplets' abilities had shifted from being occasional curiosities to full-blown phenomena. They could detect lies, yes, but they could also sense the presence of deceit in all its forms, hidden motives, concealed emotions, and unspoken intentions. As they entered their third year, these abilities became even more precise and unsettling. The triplets seemed to have a sixth sense, a deep, unspoken awareness of the world around them. If someone was upset, hiding something, or carrying a burden, they would sense it long before any signs were visible. This wasn't simply a child's ability to react to the emotions of others. This was something far more profound. One evening, a traveling merchant named Thompson arrived at the meeting house, seeking shelter for the night. He was an amiable man, with a smooth voice and a practiced charm. But the moment he entered the room, Caleb, Ezra, and Isaac reacted violently. They began to cry and scream, their tiny bodies trembling with fear. The adults in the room, startled by the boys' reaction, quickly ushered the merchant away. At first, they thought the boys were simply upset by the stranger's presence. But when word spread the following day that Thompson had been arrested for the brutal murder of his partner, the connection became undeniable. It was clear now that the triplets had an extraordinary ability, one that allowed them to peer into the hearts and minds of those around them. It wasn't just their ability to detect lies that set them apart. It was their sensitivity to the raw, hidden emotions that everyone else carried within. And yet, despite their gifts, the triplets were troubled by what they saw. Samuel Whitmore, who had watched over the boys as they grew, wrote in his journal, "They are not like other children. They do not smile as freely, nor do they play with the same joy. They are burdened by the truths they know, and they carry this weight with them wherever they go." As the triplets continued to develop, it became apparent that their extraordinary abilities were not confined to detecting deception or sensing emotions. There was something more, something deeper. But what was it? And what did it mean for their future? As the triplets grew older, it became increasingly apparent that their abilities extended far beyond the realm of detecting deception. By the time they were approaching their fourth birthday, Caleb, Ezra, and Isaac began to react to situations in a way that left the adults in Cedar Mills deeply unsettled. They were not simply gifted children who could sense lies. They seemed to sense danger itself, and their reactions were as profound as they were inexplicable. It first became clear during an ordinary visit from a traveling merchant, one of the many who passed through Cedar Mills on their way to bigger towns. This man, like the others before him, had come with goods to trade and would stay for the night. At first, he appeared no different than any other stranger who had passed through their community. His warm smile and friendly demeanor put everyone at ease. But as the merchant stepped into the room where the triplets were playing, the atmosphere shifted. The triplets, who had previously been joyful and carefree, suddenly grew tense. Their faces, usually filled with innocent curiosity, became eerily still, and their dark eyes locked onto the merchant. They did not move. They did not smile. They stared at him with a kind of intensity that made the adults nervous. Martha Whitmore, who had taken primary responsibility for the boys' care, noticed this strange behavior immediately. She attempted to approach the boys, but they refused to look away from the merchant. Their little bodies, usually full of energy, remained stiff, as if frozen in time. The silence in the room was suffocating. The merchant, uncomfortable with the intense gaze of the triplets, tried to brush it off, but the tension was palpable. It was as if they could see right through him, as if they knew something about him that no one else did. That night, the triplets refused to sleep. They lay wide-eyed, staring at the ceiling, their faces tight with what could only be described as fear. The next morning, before anyone had a chance to speak, the merchant was arrested. He had been caught in a scheme to defraud local farmers, using false names and stories to steal from them. He had been using his charm to cover his true intentions, and it wasn't until after the triplets' reaction that the community discovered his true nature. It was clear now, the boys didn't just sense lies or emotional distress. They could feel something far more troubling. They could sense when someone was hiding something dangerous, something that threatened the safety of those around them. Their reactions were more than simple discomfort. They were warnings, instinctive signals that something was wrong, far beyond the scope of what could be detected by ordinary means. As their second year came to a close, it became evident that the triplets' ability to sense danger was becoming stronger, more acute. They began reacting not only to the people around them but also to the environment itself. A subtle shift in the air, the faintest change in the energy around them, was enough to trigger their heightened sensitivity. They could tell when someone was lying, yes, but they could also sense when harm was near, even if they could not see it. This new development was disturbing to the adults in Cedar Mills, who had always viewed the boys as something more than ordinary children but not entirely understanding the full extent of their abilities. One particularly tense night, as a storm raged outside, the triplets suddenly began to cry in unison. Their cries were not the simple whimpers of upset children. They were cries of pure terror. Their little bodies trembled as though they were witnessing some unseen horror. Martha rushed to them, trying to comfort them, but their cries only grew louder. Their gaze was fixed on something beyond the walls of the house, their eyes wide and unblinking. It was as though they could see something the rest of the world could not. At that moment, the air in the room seemed to grow heavier, colder. It was as if the storm outside had somehow become a part of their fear, amplifying the sense of impending danger. Samuel Whitmore, who had been tending to the crops in the fields, was equally shaken by the boys' reaction. He had never seen them so distressed, so vulnerable. He couldn't explain it, but something about the way they looked at him, their faces twisted in fear, made him feel that something was coming, something that would change everything. It wasn't until 2 days later that the source of their distress became clear. A group of slave catchers, notorious for their cruelty, was spotted on the outskirts of Cedar Mills. They had tracked a group of freedom seekers who were passing through the area, and they were closing in on the meeting house. The triplets, who had been inconsolable that night, had sensed the presence of these men before anyone else had. Their distress had been a warning, one that no one had understood until it was nearly too late. The triplets' connection to the world around them was not just emotional or mental. It seemed to transcend ordinary human perception. They could sense danger from miles away, long before any sign of it became visible to others. Their heightened sensitivity to threats, whether physical or emotional, had become their most powerful ability, but it was also a heavy burden. They were burdened not just with knowledge, but with the constant awareness of everything that was wrong with the world. And, as their powers grew, so did their sense of isolation. By their third year, the triplets were increasingly withdrawn. They had learned to conceal their abilities, but the weight of the knowledge they carried was evident in their distant expressions. They had come to understand that they were different, but not in a way that could be easily explained. They weren't simply gifted children. They were something far more complex, something that made others uncomfortable. The adults of Cedar Mills began to rely on the triplets, but with every new discovery, the distance between them and the boys grew wider. The triplets, once innocent children, had become guardians, sentinels of a truth that no one could fully grasp. As the days grew colder and the winds of change began to howl through the hills of Cedar Mills, the tension in the air became palpable. For years, Samuel Whitmore and his community had worked tirelessly to protect freedom seekers traveling through the Underground Railroad. But now, with the passing of the Fugitive Slave Act, the risks were higher than ever. The threat of betrayal, the constant fear of discovery, and the looming presence of slave catchers were a reality that couldn't be ignored. The first sign that danger was closing in came one evening when an old friend of Samuel's, a man named Joshua, arrived at the meeting house with alarming news. The Garrett brothers, notorious slave catchers, were in the area, and they had been asking questions about the meeting house. Worse still, they had been seen in the company of several other men, and rumors had begun to circulate that the group was planning a raid on Cedar Mills. Word had it that someone had betrayed them, someone who had revealed the location of the meeting house to the bounty hunters. The group's presence in the area meant only one thing: Cedar Mills was no longer safe. The urgency of the situation could not be ignored. Samuel Whitmore's first instinct was to evacuate the freedom seekers hiding in the basement. The usual protocol was clear: the passageway to the northern tunnel, a hidden route that led out of Cedar Mills, had always been the safest escape route. But with the growing number of slave catchers in the area, it was no longer just about saving the fugitives. The meeting house itself, and everyone in it, was at risk. That night, as the wind howled outside and the chill of fear settled over the town, Ruth's labor intensified. Despite the growing urgency, there was no way to ignore the fact that her time had come. She had been in labor for hours, her contractions coming fast and furious, but it was clear that there was no moving her now. Martha and Rebecca Whitmore, who had attended to Ruth throughout her pregnancy, rushed to her side, trying to comfort her as best they could. The rest of the community, under Samuel's direction, worked quickly to prepare for the inevitable confrontation with the slave catchers. Inside the basement, Ruth was calm, her face pale but steady. There was no panic in her demeanor, only an eerie serenity that belied the chaos unfolding around her. The triplets, though still only infants, seemed to sense the urgency of the moment. Even though they had not yet spoken a word, they began to stir. Their little bodies tensed, their dark eyes wide and alert, as if they were already aware of the peril that loomed above. As Ruth's labor continued, the rest of the community worked feverishly to move the freedom seekers to safety. Samuel led the men through the back of the meeting house to the hidden tunnel, guiding them away from danger. But the triplets, who had been eerily silent throughout the commotion, suddenly became agitated. They began to cry, their tiny voices rising in perfect unison. The sound was not one of distress but of warning, a sharp, piercing cry that seemed to echo through the walls. Martha, who had been attending to Ruth, looked up in alarm as she heard the cries of the triplets. Her first instinct was to reassure the children, but when she saw their faces, their eyes wide and intense, as if they were staring into something only they could see, she felt a cold shiver run down her spine. It was as if they could sense something no one else could. In a matter of minutes, Samuel returned, his face pale with fear. "They're here," he whispered, his voice tight with panic. "The Garretts. They've come, and they're closer than we thought." The plan had been to move Ruth and the freedom seekers out of the house through the tunnel, but with the slave catchers closing in, it seemed almost impossible. The only option now was to stay hidden and hope the boys' strange abilities could somehow give them the edge they needed. As the sounds of footsteps grew louder above them, the room in the basement became suffocating. Ruth's labor accelerated, but so did the sense of dread in the air. With every passing moment, the tension built, and it was as if the very walls of the meeting house were closing in. The triplets, whose strange abilities had already made themselves known, grew still. Their eyes, once filled with curiosity, now seemed to reflect something far darker, a deep, knowing understanding of the danger that loomed just above them. The Garrett brothers, along with their crew, entered the meeting house with brutal efficiency. The sounds of boots on the wooden floors above were deafening. Heavy footsteps passed directly over the trapdoor that concealed the basement entrance, the noise making the heart of anyone who heard it race with fear. The triplets, however, remained unerringly calm. They lay perfectly still in Ruth's arms, their identical eyes following every movement above them, as if anticipating each step, each turn of the searchers. The babies made no sound, not a single whimper, not even a breath. It was as though they knew the key to their survival was silence. As the Garretts moved throughout the house, their dogs sniffing the floorboards and scratching at the foundation, the community held its breath. The triplets' stillness was both unsettling and comforting. They were, perhaps, the only ones who truly knew whether or not they would make it out alive. The search above them continued for what seemed like hours, but the Garretts, frustrated and growing desperate, finally gave up and left. It wasn't until the last echoes of their footsteps faded into the distance that the triplets finally stirred. Their cries, when they came, were not just the cries of newborns, but a sound of release, of tension finally breaking. It was as if they had been holding their breath, waiting for the right moment to let the world know they had survived. Ruth, whose condition had worsened in the hours of silence, passed away shortly after. Her last words to Martha were both prophetic and chilling. "They'll know things. They'll always know." The birth of the triplets was not just a personal event for Ruth. It was a moment that would mark the beginning of something extraordinary. As the wind outside picked up, howling through the narrow streets of Cedar Mills, the basement of the meeting house was filled with a tense, almost supernatural stillness. The weight of the situation hung in the air, pressing down on everyone gathered there. Ruth's labor, which had begun hours earlier, seemed to stretch far beyond the natural course of childbirth. She lay still, her breathing steady but controlled, as though she was waiting for something, waiting for the exact moment when these 3 children would arrive and change everything. Martha Whitmore, though a seasoned midwife, was perplexed. Ruth's calm demeanor during the labor was unlike any other childbirth she had witnessed. There were no screams, no frantic attempts to push through the pain. Ruth simply breathed in rhythm with the contractions. Her eyes closed, her face serene, almost detached from the chaos happening around her. It was as if she was waiting for something, or someone, to make an appearance, and that something was more than just a baby being born. It wasn't until Ruth spoke, her voice soft and almost melodic, that Martha realized something was different about this birth. 3, Ruth whispered, opening her eyes and locking them with Martha's gaze. 3 boys. They've been waiting for tonight. The words were strange, not just the knowledge of the triplets' gender, but the certainty with which Ruth spoke. There was an eerie calmness in her voice, and Martha's heart skipped a beat. Ruth's pregnancy had been unusual, and the baby's birth had been marked by an unnatural silence. But this declaration, this knowledge of the children's gender before birth, only deepened the mystery. As Ruth's labor progressed, the room seemed to shift. The coldness of the air and the stillness of the triplets' birth became even more pronounced. The first boy arrived with little effort. Ruth's body moved in perfect synchronization with each contraction, and the baby slipped into Martha's arms without so much as a cry. It was a perfect child, fully formed, eyes wide open, and breathing as if he had been alive for far longer than a few moments. Before anyone could process the birth of the first, the second child followed immediately, arriving with equal calm. Again, no cries, no discomfort, just the steady rhythm of Ruth's labor and the arrival of the second boy. The third boy came almost as soon as the second, completing the trio in a seamless motion. Martha held the 3 babies in her arms, her hands trembling as she marveled at the eerily quiet birth. No one in the room spoke. The silence was overwhelming, unnerving. The triplets, once cradled in Ruth's arms, lay perfectly still. They did not cry, did not move, but simply stared with dark, alert eyes that seemed to be following every movement in the room. It was as though they were fully aware of their surroundings, fully cognizant of the moment of their birth. The sense of stillness in the room felt unnatural, as if time itself had frozen for those few moments. Ruth, her body exhausted and pale from the effort, held her 3 sons close to her chest. Her final words were barely above a whisper, but they carried with them a chilling clarity. "They will know things," Ruth said, her voice barely audible. "Things no one else can. They will see what others cannot. They will always know." The room fell silent. Martha, Rebecca, and Samuel Whitmore, who had been tending to the other members of the household, exchanged uneasy glances. Ruth's words hung in the air, and though no one understood their full meaning, there was a sense of foreboding that lingered long after she passed away in the hours that followed. Ruth's death was as quiet as her labor had been, and as her breath finally slowed and her body went still, it felt as if the world had lost something precious. But in the stillness of the basement, amidst the faint flickering of candles and the low murmur of the wind outside, something else was born, a knowledge that would guide Samuel Whitmore and the others in the community, and ultimately the world, to an understanding that their lives would never be the same. The triplets, now cradled in Martha's arms, were more than just children. They were the key to a mystery far greater than anyone could imagine. Their powers, though as yet undiscovered, would grow stronger with each passing day, and soon the Quaker community would come to realize that the triplets were not ordinary children. They were something else entirely, something that could change the very course of human history. As the months passed and the triplets grew older, their extraordinary abilities became impossible to ignore. The strange silence surrounding their birth, along with the eerie calmness that had marked their early days, gradually gave way to a growing awareness of their uncanny perceptiveness. From an early age, Caleb, Ezra, and Isaac demonstrated an unsettling accuracy when it came to detecting the hidden emotions and intentions of those around them. It wasn't just that they could sense lies. They could feel the deepest currents of human thought, emotions, and fears that others kept buried. The first sign that the boys' abilities were more than just a passing curiosity came when they were just over a year old. The triplets began to display an unusual reaction whenever a visitor entered the meeting house. It was subtle at first, but it didn't take long for those around them to notice. When a guest would arrive, the boys would fix their eyes on them, and their expressions would shift, as if they were seeing through the visitor's facade. Their small faces, once full of innocent curiosity, would now tighten with suspicion or, more often, an unnerving calm. The triplets seemed to judge the visitor not by what they said or how they looked, but by something deeper, something that others couldn't understand. The first time it became truly undeniable was when a local merchant, who had always been well-liked by the community, visited the meeting house. He came with supplies, as was customary, and was welcomed with the usual kindness. But as soon as he stepped inside, the boys' demeanor changed. They didn't smile. They didn't show any signs of excitement at the new face. Instead, they simply stared at him, their identical eyes fixed on him with an intensity that made the merchant uncomfortable. It was a look that pierced through him, as though the boys knew something that no one else did. Martha Whitmore, who had grown accustomed to the triplets' strange behaviors, tried to dismiss the moment as simply the boys being children. But the merchant seemed unsettled, his usual warmth replaced by an unease that could not be ignored. He hurriedly left after delivering his goods, but not before whispering something that would come to haunt the community. "There's something off about those boys. I don't trust them." The next day, news arrived that the merchant had been caught in a scheme to defraud the town. He had been selling false goods to farmers, and his charming demeanor had hidden his fraudulent intentions. The triplets, despite being too young to understand the full weight of the situation, had somehow sensed the man's duplicity long before anyone else had. Their reaction had been an instinctual warning, one that they had not yet learned to explain, but one that was undeniable. As word spread of the boys' abilities, the community began to see them not just as the strange triplets born in the basement of the meeting house, but as something more. They became a symbol of something otherworldly, a mystery that demanded further exploration. People began to seek the triplets out, not just for their cuteness or to marvel at their synchronized movements, but because they began to understand that the boys had a unique gift, one that could be used to help others, to expose hidden truths. One day, a well-known figure from the local community, a farmer named Jacob, came to the meeting house seeking help. He had been having trouble with a dishonest business partner, and he believed that his partner was lying to him about their dealings. Desperate for answers, Jacob turned to the triplets, hoping that their remarkable abilities might give him the truth he sought. When Jacob arrived, he found the triplets sitting quietly, as they often did, their eyes following his every move. Without saying a word, the boys turned their heads in unison, their faces reflecting a strange recognition of something that was not immediately visible. Jacob hesitated but then asked, "Are you able to tell me if he's lying?" The triplets didn't speak. Instead, they looked at him, and then, one by one, turned away, their expressions shifting to one of disinterest. Jacob, uncertain but intrigued, pressed on, asking again if they could help him. After a moment of silence, Caleb, the eldest of the triplets, looked directly at Jacob. "He lies," Caleb said quietly, "and he's hiding something." Jacob was taken aback. He hadn't expected the boys to speak, let alone provide such a clear answer. But it was the truth. As the weeks went by, Jacob's suspicions were confirmed, and his business partner was exposed for his deceit. Jacob, grateful for the triplets' insight, spread word of their abilities to others in the community. Soon, the triplets were not only regarded as strange children but as essential tools in navigating the complex, often dangerous world of Cedar Mills. People began to rely on them, seeking them out for guidance and answers. Though the triplets were still young, they had already proven their worth, not just as protectors of the Underground Railroad, but as sentinels of truth, able to see the hidden layers of human nature. But the triplets, even as they grew, remained distant, as though the knowledge they carried was too much to bear. They seemed to sense things that others could not, and though they had the ability to expose lies and deceit, they remained silent for most of the time. They observed, they watched, but they never fully engaged. It was as though they were becoming something apart from the world around them, something that could never truly belong. The tension in Cedar Mills had been growing for weeks. The Underground Railroad, which had long served as a beacon of hope for freedom seekers, was now under direct threat. The Garrett brothers, notorious slave catchers, had been scouring the area, hunting down anyone who dared to help the enslaved escape to freedom. Whispers of betrayal had spread throughout the town, making everyone suspicious, fearful, and on edge. And in the midst of it all, the triplets' powers had only grown stronger, more dangerous, as they began to sense the depths of human deceit and the impending disaster that loomed just on the horizon. It was on a bitter night in late February, the anniversary of their birth, that the triplets' abilities were put to the ultimate test. Samuel Whitmore had received word that a group of freedom seekers, led by a trusted conductor, was on its way to Cedar Mills. But something felt wrong. Samuel couldn't shake the feeling that betrayal was imminent, and the triplets' strange behavior only confirmed his suspicions. The boys had been unusually agitated that afternoon. They refused to enter the meeting house, their eyes locked onto the road that led to the town, as though they were waiting for something or someone. They whispered to each other in that strange, flowing language that no one could understand, and their faces were clouded with an emotion that was difficult to read. It wasn't fear, exactly, but something more unsettling, the kind of knowing that no one else possessed. Samuel had grown used to their silent warnings, but this was different. It was as though they could see something he couldn't, something that could destroy them all. As the hours passed, Samuel tried to shake the growing unease that had settled in his chest. He'd been involved in the Underground Railroad for nearly a decade, and he knew the importance of discretion, of keeping the network hidden and safe. But that night, as the clock ticked down and the shadows grew longer, it became clear that the danger wasn't coming from the outside. It was coming from within. When the group of freedom seekers finally arrived at the meeting house, Samuel greeted them with his usual calm, but the triplets refused to enter. They stood just outside the door, their small bodies tense and unmoving, their eyes never leaving the group of newcomers. Caleb, the oldest of the three, was the first to speak, though his words were not directed at Samuel. "Don't trust him," Caleb said, his voice sharp and filled with an authority that was unnatural for a boy of his age. "He's not who he says he is. He's lying." Samuel's heart skipped a beat. He had seen the conductor, James Morrison, many times before. He had always been reliable, trustworthy, and kind. But as Caleb's words hung in the air, doubt crept into Samuel's mind. His eyes flicked over to Morrison, who stood near the back of the group, seemingly oblivious to the boys' gaze. Martha Whitmore, who had come up behind Samuel, was watching the triplets intently. She had seen their abilities grow over time, but nothing had prepared her for this. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice tight with worry. "He brings death," Isaac, the second triplet, added quietly. "So much death. He will betray you all." The words were chilling. It was as though the triplets could see something that no one else could, something that was hidden from plain sight. As the group began to settle in for the night, Samuel couldn't shake the gnawing feeling in his stomach. The boys were never wrong, not about the things that truly mattered. He had learned that long ago. But how could this be? Morrison had been their ally for years, and to suspect him now felt like a betrayal in itself. Samuel's mind raced as he weighed the options. He trusted the boys, but he also trusted Morrison. Could they really be right? Could they have somehow detected betrayal where no one else could? The stakes had never been higher. If the triplets were right, the entire underground station could be compromised. Against his better judgment, Samuel decided to send word ahead to the next station, warning them of possible danger. He also arranged for 2 trusted men to follow the group at a distance, ostensibly to provide extra security. But in his heart, he feared the worst. That night, the triplets remained outside, watching silently as the group settled in for the evening. Samuel tried to focus on the work at hand, but the boy's ominous warning lingered in his thoughts, overshadowing everything else. He couldn't shake the feeling that he had made a terrible mistake, but what could he do now? If Morrison was truly a traitor, then their entire network would be at risk. The next day, Samuel's worst fears were realized. Word came that the group, led by Morrison, had been ambushed by slave catchers just outside of Cedar Mills. 7 people were killed, including 2 children. 5 others were captured and dragged back to Kentucky, and Morrison, the man Samuel had trusted for years, was revealed to have been working as a double agent. He had sold them out, guiding the group straight into a carefully planned trap. Samuel was devastated. The triplets had been right all along, but the cost of ignoring their warning was too great to bear. 7 innocent lives had been lost because of his hesitation, because he hadn't trusted the boys when it mattered most. In the wake of the massacre, the community was left reeling. The triplets had saved them from a far worse fate, but the price of their knowledge had been made clear. They weren't just children who could sense deception. They were human lie detectors, gifted with the ability to see things that others could not. But with that gift came a burden, one that the boys themselves had begun to feel more keenly as they grew older. They had seen the depths of human evil, the darkness that resided in the hearts of men, and it was taking a toll on them. As Samuel sat in the quiet of the meeting house, reflecting on the loss and the betrayal, he couldn't help but wonder what the future held for the triplets. They had saved Cedar Mills, but at what cost? Their powers had been instrumental in preventing a far greater tragedy, but they had also revealed the harsh truth that the boys, despite their extraordinary gifts, were not immune to the darkness of the world around them. The aftermath of the tragedy that struck Cedar Mills was far-reaching. The loss of 7 innocent lives and the betrayal by a trusted ally shook the community to its core. The triplets had done what they could to protect the underground network, but at what cost? Their abilities, once seen as a mysterious gift, were now a burden. A gift that allowed them to see the truth, but also a gift that revealed the painful, ugly realities of human nature. Samuel Whitmore, though grateful for the triplets' help, was troubled by the weight of their knowledge. The triplets had become more than just children. They were something else, something far beyond what anyone could fully comprehend. They could see into the hearts of men, and yet, that vision had led them to a darker understanding of the world. They had witnessed betrayal, murder, and cruelty long before anyone else could detect it. And with each new revelation, the burden they carried grew heavier. As the community of Cedar Mills rebuilt in the wake of the attack, the triplets withdrew further into themselves. They had always been different from other children, but now, more than ever, they were isolated. Their abilities set them apart in a way that made it hard for anyone, even the most empathetic, to understand what they were going through. They could see lies, sense danger, and feel the weight of the world's secrets, but they couldn't share these burdens with anyone. In the years that followed, the triplets continued to grow, their abilities becoming even more refined and powerful. Yet, they remained silent, often retreating into their own world of whispers and unspoken words. Samuel Whitmore, though he had come to see them as more than just extraordinary children, knew that they were not just the future of the Underground Railroad. They were something new, something that could either elevate humanity or drive it to the brink of despair. Ruth's final words echoed in Samuel's mind, words that had once seemed so strange. They will know things. They will always know. It was clear now that the triplets' abilities were not just about seeing the truth. They were about understanding the deeper currents of the human soul. And yet, for all their wisdom, for all their knowledge, the triplets were still just children. They had seen too much, understood too much, and carried the weight of humanity's darkest secrets. As the years passed, whispers of the triplets spread far beyond Cedar Mills. Their powers were no longer confined to the small Quaker community. People came from all corners of the country, seeking the boys' guidance, hoping to tap into their extraordinary abilities. But the triplets, who had once been so eager to help, now withdrew further. They had seen the consequences of their gift and understood that sometimes, knowing too much could be more of a curse than a blessing. The story of the Cedar Mills triplets did not end in that small town, nor did it end with their departure. Their legacy continued to unfold in ways no one could have imagined, as their descendants, hidden in the shadows, quietly carried on the triplets' unique abilities. And though the world had never fully understood the triplets, one thing was certain: they were the beginning of something far greater than anyone could comprehend. As the years went by, Samuel Whitmore's final journal entry, written in the quiet hours before his death, spoke volumes about the future of the triplets. I have seen the future of humanity, and it both terrifies and amazes me. What will become of them, of us? I do not know, but I pray that wherever they go, whatever they become, they remember the love and kindness they received in our small community. The triplets were no longer children. They were a part of something much larger, a story that would continue to unfold for generations to come.